May 16, 1943, close to midnight. High on the wall of the mini dam, a German gunner leaned into the cold and watched the water. Behind him sat 130 million tons of it black, still, held back by a wall of concrete thick enough to drive a truck along the top. He wasn't worried. Nobody worried about the dam. They had been told it couldn't be touched. Bombs couldn't crack a wall this thick. Torpedoes couldn't reach its steel nets hung in the water like a spider's web, waiting to swallow anything that tried. The dam was a fortress. The dam was forever. Then, he heard it. Engines. Low. Wrong. Not the high drone of a bomber far above, but a roar coming in flat across the reservoir, so low the aircraft seemed to be sitting on the water itself. He stared. A Lancaster enormous, black skimming the surface toward the wall, and beneath it, something dropped. Something round. Something that should have sunk like a stone. It didn't sink. It bounced. Once, twice, skipping across the black water, straight over the nets, straight toward him. This is the story of that weapon. A bomb the experts called ridiculous. An idea the high command laughed out of the room. And the quiet engineer, they almost silenced the man whose nonsense was about to break the unbreakable. To understand the dam, you have to understand the valley behind it. In 1943, the Ruhr was the beating heart of the German war machine. Steel poured from its furnaces. Its factories built the tanks, the guns, the shells, the raw muscle of the enemy. And all of it, every furnace and turbine, ran on one thing: water. The great dams of the Ruhr, the Möhne, the Eder, the Sorp held back entire reservoirs. They fed the factories. They turned the turbines that lit the cities and powered the machines. Cut the water, and you didn't just flood a valley. You reached into the throat of German industry and squeezed. The British knew this. They had known it for years. The problem was simple, and it was brutal. They couldn't touch the dams. Night after night, Bomber Command sent men over the Ruhr, wave after wave, into some of the deadliest skies on Earth. A corridor so thick with guns and searchlights, the crews had a grim name for it. And still the dam stood. A bomb dropped from height might miss the wall by 100 yards in the dark. Even a direct hit only chipped the surface of something built to hold back an ocean. Torpedoes were the obvious answer. Run them in low, straight at the wall. But the Germans had thought of that. Heavy steel nets hung across the water in front of each dam, layer on layer, ready to catch any torpedo long before it reached the concrete. So there it was. A target worth more than 100 factories. And no weapon on Earth that could hit it. The men who flew over the Ruhr were paying a terrible price for very little. Something had to change. Someone had to think differently. Someone did. And nobody wanted to listen to him. His name was Barnes Wallis. He was not a general. He was not a pilot. He was an engineer, middle-aged, softly spoken, the kind of man who noticed things other people walked past. He worked for an aircraft firm, and he had spent years quietly staring at the problem of the dams like a man circling a locked door. Wallis had an idea. A strange one. He believed a bomb didn't have to smash through a dam to break it. It had to touch it flush against the wall, underwater, and then explode. Down there, the water itself would become a weapon. It couldn't compress, couldn't get out of the way, so it would drive the force of the blast straight into the concrete. One clean shock, in exactly the right place, and even a wall like the Möhne could crack. It was elegant. On paper, it was almost perfect. There was just one impossible detail. How do you place a bomb underwater, flat against a wall, past a curtain of steel nets, in the dark, with every gun on the dam pointed at you? Wallis's answer was the part that made men laugh. Bounce it. Skip the bomb across the surface of the reservoir, like a flat stone across a pond over the top of the nets, until it reached the wall, kissed the concrete, and rolled down into the deep. When he said it out loud, the reaction was almost pity. A skipping bomb? A grown man talking about stones on a pond, in the middle of a war? The senior ranks weren't impressed. One of the most powerful men in Bomber Command dismissed the whole concept as the wildest kind of nonsense. Doors closed, Meetings ended early. But Wallis did not stop. He went home. He took a tub of water and a handful of marbles, and he began flicking them across the surface in his own garden, watching how they danced and skipped. Then came bigger tests, out at the coast hurling spheres across open water, proving splash by splash that a spinning ball could ride across the surface instead of sinking into it. Slowly, grudgingly, the door opened a crack. He would get his chance. But the clock was cruel. The reservoirs were at their fullest in spring, and spring was nearly gone. The weapon they finally built looked like a joke. It was not sleek. It was not sharp. It was a drum, a great steel cylinder weighing roughly 4 tons, closer to a household boiler than anything you'd expect to fall from a bomber. Its code name was Upkeep. And to work, it had to spin. Before release, a motor inside the aircraft spun the drum backwards hundreds of turns every minute until it was a blur. That backspin was the secret. It would help the bomb grip the water and skip, and later help it cling to the dam wall and roll down instead of drifting away. But the machine was only half the problem. The other half was the flying. For the trick to work, the bomb had to be released from exactly 60 feet above the water. Not 70, not 50. 60. At night. Over enemy territory. Any higher and the bomb would shatter on impact. Any lower and the aircraft would touch the water and be gone. 60 feet, in the dark, is almost impossible to judge by eye. So, they cheated beautifully. They fixed 2 spotlights to the underside of each Lancaster, angled so their beams crossed at a single point. When the 2 circles of light became one on the surface of the water, the aircraft was at exactly 60 feet, not 1 foot more. And the distance to release? Just as clever, just as simple. A little wooden sight, a triangle, with 2 nails standing up from it. When the 2 towers on top of the dam lined up perfectly behind those nails, the crew knew they had reached the exact spot to let the bomb go. 2 spotlights and a wooden triangle. That was the machinery meant to break the Ruhr. The crews chosen to carry it were pulled together into a brand new Unit 6 Sec 13 Squadron under a 24-year-old wing commander named Gibson. A veteran already, cool and hard, handed a mission so secret that for weeks even he couldn't tell his men what they were training to attack. So they trained the only way they could. Low, lower than felt sane. Night after night, roaring across lakes and reservoirs at rooftop height, learning to hold a heavy bomber dead steady at 60 feet while the water blurred beneath them. It felt like madness. Soon they would do it for real, with the guns firing back. On the night of the raid, 19 Lancasters lifted off in 3 waves and pointed their noses at Germany. They flew low the entire way, skimming across the Netherlands so close to the ground they seemed to thread between the treetops, ducking under the radar that swept the sky above them. It was breathtaking. And it was deadly. Some never reached the dams at all. The low flying that hid them from radar left no room for error, and the enemy's guns were waiting along the route. Then, ahead in the dark, the Möhne. Gibson went first. He lined up, dropped to 60 feet, the 2 beams of light kissing together on the black water, and released. The drum hit the surface and skipped once, twice riding straight over the nets, and struck the wall. A vast column of water climbed into the night sky. And the dam held. Another aircraft ran in, another skip across the reservoir, another towering plume. Still the wall stood. Now think about it from the German side. From the top of that dam. They had been told this could not happen. And it was happening anyway. Aircraft that would not climb to a safe height and run, that came in flat and slow and simply kept coming. A weapon that skipped over their nets as if the nets weren't there. Wave after wave, refusing to stop. And Gibson did something that turned the fear back on them. As each of his crews made their run, he flew his own aircraft in alongside high exposed, deliberately pulling the enemy guns onto himself to take the pressure off the man dropping the bomb. He made himself the target so his crews could aim true. Bomb after bomb. Plume after plume. The wall shuddering under blows it was never built to take. Then it moved. A crack. A gap. And suddenly the top of the Möhne Dam simply wasn't there anymore. The wall gave way, and the reservoir behind it, 130 million tons of held-back water, found the hole and tore through it. The word went out across the German lines in disbelief. The Möhne was broken, the unbreakable wall was open, and the flood was already moving down the valley in the dark. But the night was not finished. While the Möhne emptied itself into the valley, the rest of the force pressed on to the second target, the Eder, the largest reservoir of them all. The Eder was, in some ways, worse than the Möhne. Not because of its guns, it had almost none. Because of its shape. It sat deep in a twisting valley ringed by high ground, so that a bomber had to drop out of the hills, corkscrew down toward the water, level off at 60 feet, release, and then haul upward fast enough to clear the mountain waiting on the far side. It took nerve that is hard to imagine. They did it anyway, and the Eder, too, gave way. Two of the great dams of the Ruhr, broken in a single night. The water that poured out did exactly what Wallis had promised. It reached into the valley and swept its power away. Factories, power stations, roads, bridges, pumping works swept away or buried in mud. The cost on the ground was heavy. Somewhere near 1,600 people lost their lives beneath the dams that night, many of them workers and prisoners held in the valley below. Even a triumph in war carries a bill like that. And here is the hard truth the legend often skips. The third dam, the Sorpe, did not fall. The Sorpe was built differently, with a great earthen core, and breaking it needed a different kind of attack, and more aircraft than ever reached it. By the time the raid was over, the Sorpe still stood, and the Sorpe may have mattered most of all to the Ruhr's water. The victory was real. It was also incomplete. There is a deeper contrast still. Remember how close this weapon came to never flying at all. Remember the men in high places who called Wallis's idea nonsense, who nearly buried it in a drawer. If their certainty had won, if arrogance had held the door shut just a little longer, those dams would have stood untouched, and every airman lost over the Ruhr in the years before would have bought nothing at all. And the price of this one night was steep. Of the 19 crews that set out, 8 did not come home. 53 men were gone by morning. The impossible had been done, and it had been paid for in full. When Barnes Wallis learned how many crews had not returned, the quiet engineer who had been laughed at for years wept. The idea had worked. But he could never see it as a simple victory again. The rest of the world could. Guy Gibson was given the Victoria Cross, the highest honor there is. His men, the crews who had flown at 60 feet into the dark with 2 spotlights and a wooden triangle, became a legend that has never faded. The world gave them a name that said everything. The Dam Busters. And the bomb that bounced the drum, the barrel. The joke the experts couldn't describe without smiling earned its place in history as one of the boldest weapons ever flown. So go back to a few minutes before midnight on the 16th of May 1943, back to that gunner on top of the Möhne, leaning into the cold, watching the still black water he had been promised was safe forever. He heard engines where there should have been silence. He saw something drop that should have sunk. And he watched it bounce toward him across the dark. They had laughed at a bomb that bounced. They did not laugh for long.